good to go in just a second.
It's streaming now, it says.
Awesome.
Hey guys, welcome to Musicast. This is our first one, and we're really excited that you joined us. We've got Miss G, as most of you know.
Hello.
Mr. Fair. Yep, I'm Mr. Mosser, and behind me is Tootie, as you all know. And we have a guest today, and our guest is Scott Schreer. And we've just been talking to him for the past 15 minutes, and great guy. And we are really excited to ask him a couple questions. So you guys are all linking on. I know there's a pile of you that are calling me right now on my phone saying you can't get on. You can now. All right. So here we go. Mr. Fair.
Thanks, Mr. Mosser. So as people are coming in, just to give them a minute or two to get in and make sure the links are working, for all of you watching, what we were just talking about with Mr. Schreer is kind of the intent of the podcast and what we're really looking at. And for those of you that tuned in last week when we tested it, we really want this to kind of get its own legs and become something that we can do weekly for you, and produce it a little more. And different elements of that have to do with naming it, which we talked about last week. And right now our focus is creating a theme or writing an idea of like a theme song that could play as we start it and go live, so it feels a little more produced. So Scott, I think that's a great moment to ask just what your career has led to, because I think that you're a name that is probably more household than people realize. And then once you start to look at your body of work, it becomes much more clear how you are as relevant as you are.
Yeah. So thanks. I'm happy to be here. I don't do a lot of these either. I'm glad to be the guinea pig on your first podcast. So thank you for that. Well, you know, the story is really not that complicated how I got into this. I was too short and too slow to become a professional baseball player, which was my first love, you know. And, I started playing piano by ear when I was 7 or 8 years old. And my dad bought me a set of drums for my 13th birthday. And that was like it, you know. I realized that I loved baseball, but music was kind of cool. And I started practicing every day when I got home from school. And, you know, I studied professionally, I guess, growing up as a teenager. I always loved music. I always had an ear for music naturally. I think you're born with that or you're not. And I was born with it. And I didn't have perfect pitch, but I was pretty close. And I kind of trained myself over the years to get, you know, really good relative pitch. But I was always interested in the piano first and foremost as my foundation. I wasn't a great piano player, but I could read music and I took a lot of lessons. So that helped me with my drumming over the years. Understanding composition really helped me a lot. My challenge in my teenage years was learning how to do a double stroke press roll. That was my objective. I wanted to accomplish that before I left my teenage years, which I was able to do. I would practice every day. In high school, I went to the Brooklyn Academy of Music in Brooklyn. I got another good basic education there as a high school student. Played in a lot of bands. I was good, wasn't great yet. Not that I'm great now, but I was good. Always try to write songs in my head on the piano. Didn't really have a lot of money, didn't really have a lot of equipment back then, but I knew I really wanted to pursue something in music, you know, whether it was performing and or composing or writing. Never really wanted to be an artist per se. I didn't want to be in the front of the camera, but I wanted to be involved. I got into college. As I was just telling you guys before we go on the air, that I had unbelievably great professors in college that were highly motivational, which was so important. Never had a bad class. I never had a bad teacher. I don't think I missed 3 days of college in 4 years. I just couldn't wait to get up and go to school and learn more about music and theory and, you know, take opera classes and go to the opera and take my piano lessons, do my percussion. I was just highly motivated, you know, on my own, but my teachers instilled that work ethic and the sponge learning and practicing, it just enhanced my desire even exponentially. And then I met this guy in one of my jazz workshops in college who introduced me to some guys in New York that were doing some recording. And I had never been in a real professional recording studio until I was in school. And I went to the New York City and went to the recording studio, and I was introduced to a whole other world I didn't even know existed. And that was the catapult of me wanting to devote the next life to honing a skill set as a musician, composer, and a producer. And then I was off to the races. I was very fortunate. I got introduced to a music production company in New York while I was still in college. And I started interning at this music production company that did commercials. I was very low on the totem pole in this production company. And I got to go to recording sessions. They worked on very large campaigns. They worked on music for Coca-Cola and Minolta and, you know, all the major brands, fruit cereal brands. And one day, as luck would have it, I was in a meeting, and they were doing at the time what they used to call exploratories, demos. A demo is the precursor to doing a final production. And back then they used to do a lot of demos for Coca-Cola. And I got to do one of the arrangements at the back of one of the sessions that I wrote the music for a lyric that they gave me the day before. And it wound up being the music for, back then, their campaign was called Have a Coke and a Smile. None of you probably know that, but you can look it up on the internet and hear it. And it became the national campaign, the global campaign for Coca-Cola for a number of years. I put that music on what we call the demo reel. And I started sending it out to other advertising agencies to get more work. And that was how I did it. I got a call that year from another agency in New York, asked me if I wrote that music for Coke. I said I did. They brought me in to see if I wanted to work on some Snickers commercials that year. So I did, and I wound up writing Snickers Satisfies You, which none of you probably even remember, because you weren't born yet, but you can go online and listen to that. And I did a lot of commercials. I did like 20 years worth of commercials. I mean, it's hard to imagine that I did it, but I did. And then I met this guy one day who was at ABC in New York, the network. And he told me on the side that he was being interviewed for what was to become Fox Sports, as I'm sure most of you watch football and know about. And he said he wanted to have a piece of music that he could bring out to his interview to impress them. He had 3 days. I had my own studio at that time, and I had very talented composers that I worked with. And we wrote a couple of pieces of music that we gave him for his interview. And he called me on a Monday and said, "You're not going to believe this, but they told me I got the job, but all they want to know is who did the music. They want to come to New York and meet you." So that was the beginning of the next almost 20 years of my life, right? So that became the NFL on Fox theme that everybody knows, right? And I don't think I stopped working for 20 years. I did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sessions. I mean, how lucky and fortunate have I been? It's hard to imagine. But you know, it was a lot of hard work, but I was doing something I really, really loved and I really, really wanted to do. And making money wasn't the motivation. It was the love of music and the love of being creative and feeling my center and being able to know that this was what I was here to do. And it was a calling that I felt I had from a young kid. And, you know, I just try to never take it for granted and always try to improve on who I was and how I worked and, you know, how I treated people. And, you know, I think that's pretty much summarizes like the last 40 years of my life. Sorry about all these clicks in the background. People are trying to text me.
I gotta apologize too. Everybody is texting me. They can't find you. So that's I'm paying attention.
They can't what?
They're trying to get on the link, I think.
And then I tell them
Oh.
to look this up on YouTube with your name and an interview and everything, and they can't find it.
Okay, so we can do it again.
Yeah.
It'll be available after
Tell that
this.
story again, just start at the top. No. When you first started and you were kind of finding your love of music and going through those, do you have certain genres or artists that really started to catch your ear?
Yeah, actually, I did. As a drummer, there was a drummer when I was in college. His name was Billy Cobham, and Billy played with. He had his own band. He played with guitar player named John Schreer. And I had a choice one day when I was in school. It was spring break, and Billy Cobham was playing at the Village Vanguard in Manhattan. And I had a choice of going to Florida with my friends for a week or buying tickets for both shows Monday through Friday to go see Billy Cobham at the Village. And I went down to do that. Actually, it was at the Bottom Line, not at the Village Vanguard. And boy, I tell you, that was probably the best spring break I ever had in my life. I saw 2 shows a day for 5 days. And I actually wound up working with most of those guys later in my career after I graduated college and became a studio musician. So it was kind of fun, But I liked like a jazz fusion kind of thing growing up. Billy Cobham was an unbelievably technical drummer, and I aspired to be that. Never quite achieved his technicality, but I reached a certain level that enabled me to support my family.
It's one of the nicest things in terms of making the best out of a tough situation, being able to talk to our own students and they have more time in the world now to look at people and resources that they might enjoy. And from a jazz perspective, I think one of the things that we're trying to use this time for is, I'm personally not the best at improvising, and I think sometimes rhythm section wise, I think maintaining an idea of where a melody is so hard for them. So I think it's really cool to look percussion across the horns, and then the horns go the opposite direction, because you just get to watch live concerts now and go, what's happening, and talk about it with each other online, which is really nice.
I've had the unique fortune of having to work with some really iconic top musicians. The cream of the crop, higher than that, but they're few and far between. Most people like me, had to practice and practice and practice and practice and practice some more. I can't stress how important practicing is. I can't stress how important being inspired is. So if you have the right amount of inspiration and the right amount of work ethic to practice, the sky is really the limit. But unless you're one of those fortunate few, and I have met them, that could just sit down and play like they walk, like it's reflexive, but that's a gift that few and far between actually have, but most of the people that I know that I've worked with over the years, they earned it. They worked hard at it. It just didn't happen one night where they flipped the switch and they became the musician they always wanted to be. And they never stopped learning. I still practice. I practice every day. Every day I play, whether I'm getting paid for it or not, and I might be losing a little bit of my speed, I might be losing a little bit of the edge, but I still think I sound pretty good to myself, I think other people validate that, so I'm not just blowing smoke. But I record and I listen and I try to improve all the time.
And I think that mentality, when you were talking about when you go into that recording studio for the first time, it's the first time you said you were in a studio was you were older. That's something that you don't get an opportunity to do or experience. And it's one of those make or break moments where you can either hit the ground running and have the chance to go back into another studio on the opposite side of the glass, or you just go, that was cool and it's done.
But here's what's really great though about right now. And that is, to have a studio when I was starting, you needed big bucks. You needed a multi-track machine. You needed real expensive outboard gear. Now, you can record on your iPhone, for a few $100 of, cables and the right microphone and the right interface. you don't need much more than that. You could download an 8-track recorder on your iPhone, you know, and if you got the inspiration and you know how to do it, you can make some quality. Listen, man, I put things on the air that you would not believe I did on like a MacBook Air, right? You know, I always tell people, if you know what button to push, you're ahead of the game. You know, it's not how much money you have to buy the right equipment anymore. And that's why music is so great right now, because there's so much talent out there that was untapped because people didn't have the ability to make it. And now, I mean, you can make it for, you know, peanuts. And there's a lot of, as evidenced by, you know, YouTube and all the people out there that are creating and writing music. It's just, what a great time to have that ability and that outlet to be able to do that. You know, I didn't have that when I was starting out, you know, so there you go.
Do you have anyone catching your eye right now recently that you're tuning into? Either they have these Instagram live things or these YouTube live streams? Are you catching anyone particular?
Yeah, being a drummer though, right? So, you know, I've never met him. I've met a lot of drummers going in and out of sessions over the years. And I actually almost studied with the same teacher that he had, is, you know, Dave Weckl, who's like just a phenomenal drummer technician. And I just, you know, I'm enamored by his style. And, you know, I try and watch every video I can find on YouTube of his, you know, but musically, you know, I've as a drummer, I was a chameleon as a studio musician. You have to be able to cover a lot of ground, you know, because you never know what session you're going to walk into, what you're going to have to play that day or that session. So I had to listen to a lot of different genres, you know. Being a studio musician is a lot different than being a live musician. Most good live musicians are not that great studio musicians, and most great studio musicians are not that great live musicians. So being a studio musician brought a different set of technique and abilities, and I honed my skill set to be a good studio musician, like playing to a click track perfectly, you know, and not making it feel like you're doing it. You know, carrying a horn section along with, you know, fills is a very challenging situation for a drummer, especially if you're not experienced. So there's a lot of work that goes into that, and very few are able to do it well. But, you know, I listen to a lot of music. I still do it. I love classical music too. You know, I listen to a lot of classical music just to kind of calm me down a little bit, you know. But, you know, I'm a great music lover, jazz, you know, you name it, I listen to it. You know.
Can you talk for a second about what it I know you've been talking a lot about being a studio musician, and I
Sure.
don't know if our students necessarily understand what that term means or entails
Sure.
to its full extent.
Sure. So when you know, when you watch TV, you hear a lot of music. You know, you hear music in the theme songs, you hear music in the background, you hear music in commercials a lot. And that music is used where there's no artist related to it necessarily. In New York, there used to be a bunch of studio musicians that used to work for all the production companies that would create this content. Mostly commercials, but occasionally we'd get TV shows. And they would hire you to come in and do recording sessions based on the compositions that they created that you would come in to play. And you would only see it when you walked into the studio session. They would put music in front of you. So a prerequisite was knowing how to read music and how to interpret that music, whether you're playing drums or trumpet or piano or violin. You know, you had to have a proficiency of learning how to read and then interpret it. And of course, the better ones, the ones that did that better than the others, used to work all the time. So when I came into being a studio musician, I didn't know what a click track was. So because these commercials have to be perfectly timed, 30 seconds to the second, they use what's called like a metronome in the studio language. It's called a click track. And in your headphones, when you're playing, you have the tempo in your head. So you know if you read the music and you get to the end, it's exactly 30 seconds or 29 and a half seconds would fade out. So learning how to play to a click track in your head, reading music with a whole orchestra or a band, was challenging for me in the beginning. Actually, I really did a bad job of it when I first got the opportunity to do that. So I actually went home and you know, I cried probably. And then I said, I can do this. And I practiced a lot. And I called the guy and asked him to give me another shot at playing to the click track. And he did. And I was better. And the more I did it, the better I got. Did not come naturally to me. You know, it's sort of like watching the news guys on TV where they have the earphone in and the producers are talking to them, telling them what to do, but they're in the middle of another conversation. They have to pretend they're not listening to that guy in his ear, but they are, you know, and that makes or breaks a lot of newscasters, you know. So click track makes or breaks a lot of studio musicians. That's why I said before, being a good studio musician doesn't translate necessarily being a good live musician. But getting back to the theme of what I think the show is writing a theme. You know, I was also a composer. So when I wasn't working as a musician, I was writing for either other companies that I eventually would be hired to work for as a drummer, which is kind of crazy. But eventually I started my own production company and started working directly for the advertising agencies and the different production companies and networks in the city.
So,
go ahead.
sorry. When you write, since you kind of brought up the writing themes, when you do that, what's that look like from a company perspective? Do you get kind of like a bullet pointed sheet and say we want this, this, and this, or do you just say, hey, this is what I got?
It depends upon the project. So I'll pick when the UFC was on Fox. Those are the Ultimate Fighting Championships, you know. Whether I like the sport or not is irrelevant. I'm just talking about as a composer. And I got a call to create a theme for that show. You know, now, you know, I just use a little bit of common sense and go, these guys are going in a ring and they're beating the heck out of each other. So I knew the music had to be somewhat bombastic, right? It couldn't just be soft and mid-tempo. That wouldn't work. But a lot of times going against the grain does work with the visual. So it really does depend upon what the project is. When I would get an assignment, I would try and get as much information as possible. You know, I would want to know what the rough cuts or what the video looks like before it goes on the air, obviously. I'd like to know the tone and the palette of it. I'd like to get any definitive direction I can from the ultimate decision maker, because that's really important. You got to please the guy who's hiring you, right? And you know, then that's when you layer on your experience, your talent and ability, and hopefully you get a winning combination out of it. You know, when I did the NFL and Fox theme, the chairman of Fox Sports, I mean, there's been different variations of the story, but it's somewhere in there. He was in the Batman ride with his son out in California, and he liked that Batman sound, that it was in a minor key, right? So he told it came to me that he wanted that sound on steroids for the NFL. You know, so that was sort of the direction that I got, and the rest we picked up the ball, no pun intended, and ran with it. You know, so it was a very big sounding, not thematically, not melodically, but just the palette of, you know, a minor key combative. You know, because football is a combative sport. It's very, very big contact sport. So that's why it opens up. Bam, ba-da-da, ba-da-da, bam, ba-da-da, ba-da-da. You know, it had that, you know, call to action kind of thing.
What's that like to, like, I mean, looking back now at that point, it's because when you look, and we're just doing research and things and back and forth, that's, I mean, it's referred to as like the identity of, I mean, the NFL is an identity in and of itself, but that's like a synonymous thing now with it.
I'll tell you, man, you know, I read this quote from John Travolta once when he was being interviewed, and he said, every time I think my shit is cool, I can say that, right? He says, something always bad happens. You know, so I can tell you, you can never take anything for granted, and you can never think your shit is cool, because it's not, you know, it's just not, you know, and
that probably also speaks to how you keep writing themes that gain traction, though, because I think probably if you would have hit that moment and said, I got the NFL, I'm good now.
Yeah.
Who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, but remember though, man, I told you I would be doing this whether I got paid a nickel or I wrote the NFL or produced anything from there. You know, it's that wasn't the calling. You know, the fact that I got to do that is absolutely amazing. And never take it for granted. Ever, 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 man. Ever take that shit for granted. I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep saying it.
So basically, we're saying as a musician, you're never really done.
Never.
See, we run into that all the time. Oh, I'm like in theory or AP theory. Oh, I'm done. It's like you're never done.
You know, I sit here sometimes with my piano and I'm watching Pluto TV or whatever, right? And I'm watching reruns of the Addams Family, and I'm listening to the music, and it's completely campy music, right? But it's genius. I mean, I really started, I analyzed it. I sat at the piano, I started playing it. I wanted to see voice and tritones that he would put into the fills. It's just completely genius. Vic Mizzy, the guy's been dead a couple of years now. But I looked him up online. I wanted to see what else he did, how prolific he was. You never stop learning. There's an encyclopedia of music wealth out there. You can't stop learning. You're a sponge, basically, when you're a musician. And if you think you know it all, you should probably try and find another line of work.
I'm curious to know, based on, you keep talking about you were always soaking things in and that sort of idea. How did things like YouTube change your career? Did it make it harder because there's so much more out there, or did it make it easier because you had access to so much more work?
So that's a really good question. Okay. And I have been asked before, if I started out today, what do I think would have happened? And I can honestly say, I think I would have had a tougher time if I had to do it today, only because of how much access really talented people have. And there's more people doing it and competing for the same work. When I was starting out, nobody knew what a royalty payment was. Nobody knew what, a jingle studio looked like, or a jingle production company. It didn't get a lot of press. Today, you can open up a mic, go live to YouTube and sing from your bedroom and become Billy. You could become anything you want at this point. So yeah, I think it's great. I think it's amazing. I love it. I love being able to give people who didn't have the ability to show their talent a platform in which to do it. I think it's fantastic, and I encourage it because there's a lot of talent out there, a lot. And there may be only 88 notes on a piano, but man, you could do a lot with 80 if you know what you're doing, or even if you don't know what you're doing. Some of the best composers I know can't even read music. It's crazy, right? And they write the most unbelievable melodies against 3 chords. Sometimes it's magic, right? For me, it was more of a technique after a while than it was anything else. I knew I had a certain approach to creating those themes. I would always hear it in my head from the center out. You talk to orchestrators that were trombone players. They're sitting in the middle of the section. They hear things a lot differently than a drummer does, because they're sitting in a different place playing. But for me, because I'm basically a drummer more than I am a piano player, I always hear things rhythmically in my head first, and I build out from the rhythm out. But there is a technique to it, and then there's a combination of using certain sounds and instruments that I love to do and experiment with. But with sampling and all the software programs that are available in Pro Tools and other similar type, writing tools, it's just, the world's your oyster. It's kind of crazy. It's great. There's no end to it.
Do you find that you got inside your head after you got a couple published jingles and you thought, oh my gosh, now I've got to keep going?
Yeah, that's another great question. You're as good as your last gig, so to speak. I think so. Getting up and hitting doubles and triples every time you're up at the plate is pretty hard, and no one can do it.
Right.
It's sort of like being a 300 hitter in the major leagues. There's a lot of good 275 hitters, but the 300 hitters and above are the ones you hear about.
Right.
It's hard. It's definitely hard. Again, I really don't know why some do and some don't, because I really can't answer. I don't really know the answer to that. I just gave it my best every time. I would hear something 1,000 times before the guy who hired me would hear it once. you know, and I made sure that I was absolutely happy with it before I hit the send button and sent it out, you know, and then they'd always have comments and then send it back and I hear it another 1,000 times.
So you've been rejected many times in your life.
Yeah, there's no progress without rejection.
Right. Well, can you say that real loudly? So hopefully
There's no progress without rejection, you know?
we're gonna
There's
let
no
the parents
progress
know this
without
too,
rejection.
maybe.
I'm sorry?
We're gonna let the parents are listening to this.
Yeah, there's no progress without rejection. You know, a friend of mine said to me once, and I don't know if it was his thing or he heard it from his uncle, winning anything never feels as good as losing something hurts. So when I used to get called for a gig and win it, because it was competitive, other guys were working on it, it was great feeling. But getting the phone call that you didn't get it always hurt more than feeling good felt when I won. So you remember that, and that motivates you, right?
Right.
To not want to lose, right? And so here's what's interesting. As the technology became more accessible, the competition grew. So instead of somebody calling me up and going, hey, do this, we have a project, they say, hey, we're going to give this to you, but we're also giving this to 7 other composers. And then that went from, we're not just paying you, we're paying 7 other composers, to we're not paying anybody. If you want the gig, you got to compete for free. You know, at a certain point, I would say, yeah, if you want me to do it, I'll work on it until you're satisfied. If you don't like what I do initially, I'll do it over again. But I'm not going to work competitively because that's a losing game for me at a certain point. But at that point, I had a lot of successes behind me. So it just wasn't coming from out of space. It was like they knew what they were getting if they wanted to hire me. And I just wanted to create some special space that I would work till my fingers bled to make them happy, but I wouldn't do it necessarily in a competitive situation at a certain point because it just didn't make any sense. Because you can work on a project for months. You literally can. Here's one interesting thing. If somebody would call me up and say, I'm working on a project for NBC, I'm making that up. I would ask them what it is, obviously, and they would say, it's a theme for a show that we're launching in the spring. It's September now. I would not want to do that job because they had too much time to change it 50 times. If somebody would call me up and say, it's springtime, I'm launching the show next week, I used up my budget with 5 other composers, we didn't like anything we have, we don't have any money left, but it goes on the air next week, do you want to do it? I'm your guy. You know, so, you know, you learn different things as you spend years and decades in a business. And I tried to apply them as much as I can based on the project I was being asked to do or work on.
One of our students just asked a question, and I think it fits what you just said really well. Have you ever struggled to find inspiration for a piece? Because you just mentioned that sometimes you'll turn a piece around for like a week later. So how have you ever had those moments where you've really had to work to find inspiration?
I have a cute, smart answer. It depends how much money they were paying me to do it, but that's really not the answer he probably wants to hear. You know, I would say the more money I got paid, you know, the less harder it was for me to find the inspiration. But the truth of the matter is, inspiration was never really the difficulty. I never not knew to write something I liked, because I wouldn't present it if I didn't like it. And I just had, you know, like a pool of creativity that I would just pull from. I mean, listen, if you work on a project for 3 weeks every day, 12, 15 hours a day, you know, it's sort of like being in the eye of the storm. You know, you kind of lose your perspective after a while, sitting in front of, you know, your Pro Tools, your thing, and, you know, trying and editing and going blind at the same time and tired, you know. So you got to pull yourself away and take breaks, and you got to learn how to pace yourself to work on long-term projects. They're not easy to do. And you need a support staff at a certain point, you know. It's sort of like getting your hair cut. You know, one guy blows it, another guy cuts it, you know. Well, I'm not sure that that's what everybody does anymore, but, you know, it's like, you know, you need people to do the editing. I see that. You need people to do the editing, because that's a whole job into itself. You know, being a good editor is key to anybody who does composition today. Yeah, it's challenging at times, but yeah, no, I never really not had inspiration. Inspiration was not something I was short on. I was short on other things sometimes, but not inspiration.
So you're saying sometimes less is more?
Less is always more,
Mhm.
by the way. Less is always more, but it's got to be the right less.
So it's like when you watch the fashion shows, they always tell these young guys, you got to edit, you got to edit. So, I mean, how do you learn that?
By doing it over and over and over again and making mistakes and failing
Okay.
and learning what works and what doesn't.
Right.
You know, and then when you start getting positive recognition and you got to believe in what you're doing and who you are. You know, that's key. You got to have a strong foundation. You got to have a mother telling you, you're great at this. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. Keep doing it.
Right.
Self-esteem is so important. If you have low self-esteem, it's not going to show in anything you do. You got to really believe in who you are, no matter what anybody else says. You know, to me, when I heard no, when people say no to me, I heard yes. That's just who I was, right?
Right.
A lot of people hear no, they go, okay, I guess it's no. No, that doesn't work. You know, you got to believe in your ability and your talent and what you want to do, and make up your own mind. Take in as much as you can from as many people as you respect and want to hear about and hear from. But man, at the end of the day, this is your life. This is what you choose to want to do. You know, you have to make these decisions for yourself. Listen, this is just my opinion. It doesn't work for everybody. I'm just telling you what worked for me and how I got to this point, which I think is a good point, but not anywhere where I want to be yet. You know, there's still a lot of things I'm doing and I want to do, and hopefully I'll get a shot to do it. But you know, I think believing in yourself and carrying yourself with character, whether people see you or not, is really important.
Wow.
And I think acknowledging both of those points that you made, it's one of those things that I think we try. It sounds a little cliche and redundant because we say it in classrooms a lot, but the idea of, if you feel like you can do something, keep pushing and doing it, but also acknowledging that there's a lot of work and a lot of steps and a lot of process that might be between you and that ultimate doing it and goal. And I think this is more from my side of it in terms of with music, I think it becomes even more challenging because there's an expectation that you're performing your product or you are your product every time you're doing something.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. I just think that you need to believe in who you are. You know, you need to have that foundation, and you need to have self-esteem in order, and that has to come from within, and you can't get it from somebody else.
And you mentioned also as you were talking about different things you're writing, whether you had inspiration or simpler is better a lot of the times. One of the things that we're trying to do with this is we're trying to this is kind of a nice creative outlet for the three of us, but we're also trying to have it be something that our students can find enjoyment and ownership over as well. So one of the things we're kind of putting to them in the next week or 2 weeks or so is we're going to kind of challenge them with an attempt of writing our own kind of like 15 to 20 second theme that we can open and close things with. Other than that, kind of keeping things simple or looking for the inspiration, do you have any tips or tidbits that you could?
I always try to incorporate a 6-note melody into everything I did. So whether it was the opening of the NFL on Fox, da 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 da, or the Fox News Channel, da 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 da, I always try to do it within 6 or 7 notes. So I think it would be great if you said, look, you know, here's the theme idea. It opens up with the 6-note melody, and it closes with the 6-note melody, and make it interesting in the middle. You know, but give me something that I hear at least twice as the thematic portion of the theme. I want to hear the 6 notes in the front and the 6 notes in the back, and make it nice and seamless in the middle. That would be a good assignment. You know?
Was the 6 notes, was that out of practice, or is that just what you started to feel like hitting that right spot for what you were writing?
It was a combination. There were a bunch of co-writers involved in that, so it was a unique combination of everybody's input on that one. But you know, I just always liked 6 notes. It was lucky for me.
So how do you co-write a melody?
That's hard. But you know, it's sort of like, how do you co-write a melody? You know, it's sort of like, how do you co-write a song? You know, you sit down, you listen to it. If you think you can make it better, you make suggestions. You know, if you think, yeah, you know, instead of doing like C, E, G, maybe you should do C, E flat, G, make it minor. You know, and you see how it sounds. You know, you see if it feels better or not. It's hard to co-write a melody, but not always. You know, sometimes change in one note makes in a melody makes a big difference. As I'm sure you probably know that. It's hard, you know, but there are formulas that once you start getting the knack of, there's technique involved. Once you start realizing you got what it takes to do it.
Now, one of our students asked a while ago, but it fits nicely with what you're
Sure.
saying right there. Do you have like go-to people that when you think you have something good and you're ready to send it off, do you have people who you basically have like double check or proofread your work?
That's a great question. If there's no co-writers involved, or if there's, yeah, I mean, usually the engineer that I would work with that was mixing it, obviously I trust them a lot. I'm good, but I'm not a good engineer. You know, I'm not a good mixer. Let me say, technically, I'm not a good mixer. I know what a good mix should sound like. You know,
Sure.
yeah. I mean, there's different. I mean, I would have like the final say because it's my name on it. If it's my name on it alone or whatever, I would have the final say. If it's a group effort, we all would agree that it's done. You know, it can't be any better. So the fact checking, so to speak, is done internally for the most part. As far as how the mix would sound on TV, you know, that's always a point of debate. Do you need more drums? Do you need more bass? Do you need more vocals? Do you need more, you know, a piccolo trumpet? Do you need more strings in the mix? Those are always, everybody hears things differently in a mix when it's done. So there'd be different criteria that I would have that you would look at it differently. You would listen to it or hear it differently. But you know, you have to trust your ears and the equipment and speakers you're listening on. I don't know if I answered the question or not, but
Yeah, no, definitely.
yeah, I relied on my own. You know, I kind of felt at a certain point, I had this like light bulb situation happening. Like I either knew it was right or I knew it wasn't right yet. You know, and when it was right, like the light bulb kind of went off and I kind of knew it. It's kind of weird, but you know, that's kind of how I felt. Like I would have something completely done and then I'd wait overnight. I'd listen to, when I thought it was done, if it wasn't under a time constraint, I would wait till the next day to send it off to the client just to double check that, you know, I got a good night's sleep, that I wasn't having ear fatigue, listening to something 1,000 times the next day. You know, sometimes I would change things, you know, and I would definitely change things if I got comments back from the client who didn't like something, and that happens a lot. You know, it's rare that you actually write something, send it off, they love it, and it goes on the air right away. Usually it's changed a number of times.
So is it tough listening to people who have no musical ear, but are telling you to change it?
Well, yes. Well, but that's also part of paying your dues, right? Because when you're trying to get into a business, any opportunity you're going to try and take advantage of, even listening to people who you know don't really know what they're talking about. Until you can prove your value in the business, whether it's writing music or, you know, selling clothes at Bergdorf Goodman's, you have to take a back seat until you can sit in the front of the car, right? So at a certain point, you try to only talk to the decision makers so they relatively have an idea of what they're talking about. Not always, but most of the time. There's a trust factor there. And for me, I was very fortunate that people that I worked for a lot. So we developed a relationship and a working relationship. They knew how I worked. I knew how they worked. I knew what they expected. They knew what I could deliver. So it was like a low maintenance type of relationship at a certain point because I worked for them over and over and over and over again. So I had long lasting relationships. I was very fortunate that way at the different networks. So.
Very cool. If you have just a few minutes, we have a ton of questions scrolling by on our YouTube. So just some fun little questions. Do you have a favorite project that you've ever been involved in? And this was asked by Abby.
Yeah, it was actually a project that everybody knows. I mean, the NFL and Fox theme was just a moment in time that will probably never be created again. It was recorded initially in our recording studio in Midtown Manhattan. The basic tracks were recorded there, the basic instruments. A lot of it was electronic and sampling initially. Then we went to a studio called Record Plant in Manhattan, which is was a very famous recording studio. We laid down 48 tracks of electronic sequencing, along with the tracks we had from my studio. And then we took the mix out to Utah and recorded a live orchestra over there. And that's where I did all of the drum ad-libs and the percussion. And then we went to California and mixed it out in LA. So it went from our studio in Midtown Manhattan to Record Plant to Utah out to LA before it went on the air. It was quite amazing.
Wow. Now,
That's awesome.
you just, oops. Okay, sorry, you just you just mentioned that I wasn't sure. Have you done any of the drumming yourself on these recordings, or do you write it for other people?
Both. Depends what tracks there were. Yeah, in the beginning, I played on almost everything, on some either drums or percussion or something. But at a certain point, I would hire other drummers so I can stay in the booth and produce. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I think this would be for the folks who came in a little bit late, but
Right.
were you involved in scholastic music growing up? So like, middle school band or a high school band?
Well, I was studying drums from the time I was like 14 or 15 years old privately. As I said, I went to Brooklyn Academy, a high school in Brooklyn. And then I majored in music in college, and I joined the jazz workshop in my freshman year. And I was always involved in the jazz workshop for the 4 years of college. So growing up, I played in a lot of bands,
Sure.
as most kids probably do even today. Live music is great. There's nothing like it. I mean, it's great to sit in front of a computer and, use Pro Tools and, write and edit and cut and paste, but, live music, there's just no substitute for it. So.
Let's see. Isabella White is asking, do you have a favorite person that you've worked with or for?
Wow, that's a good question. A favorite person that I've worked with or for?
And Ashley also said, or did you enjoy collaborating with someone? So along the same lines.
Yeah, collaborating with, there's a guy that we write with who lives in Germany. His name is Christian. He's probably one of the best musicians I've ever met or worked with as a self-contained individual, as a writer, arranger, producer, guitar player, just a programmer extraordinaire. But he's not a household name. He's just one of these guys, it's sort of like, Michael Jackson had his programmers. I guess we had ours, when we were really busy full-time writing music. One of the, this is going to sound kind of crazy because I've played with a lot of different artists and stuff over the years. And I got to meet a lot of people in the studios. But I think I was most enamored with when I met, this is going to sound really weird because I didn't really like his music. When I met John Denver, he just had the nicest personality out of anybody I ever met in a recording studio. His vibe was really cool. So you meet so many people. Well, as a musician in New York, you meet so many people in and out of the studios all the time. You kind of got to be like, it's not really a big deal. And then I actually did a session with one of my idols, Steve Gadd, who's a drummer. I got to work with him on a few songs for an album that I worked on for somebody. And, there's so much. Yeah, I think every major, session that I did, there was always some player there that I was like, I had to not show my excitement for, that I was actually there playing with, So,
That is so cool.
yeah, definitely a gift. You're very fortunate to have that.
Last question. There's
Sure.
a ton of questions, but
I don't mind answering them. I'm just here, so go for it.
just scrolling all through. Are there gaps in the industry that you've taken the initiative to fill over to offer a new perspective for people you work with?
Okay, ask me that again because I'm not sure I understand the question.
Sure. So have you taken an initiative to fill the industry with basically something new or a new perspective?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that. I'm not sure what they're asking. Can you maybe interpret that for me?
Am
Sure.
I
Good question
okay,
there. Does anybody know what they're really asking?
Gavin, what do you mean? I think I think it's asking if like basically you've created anything, based on what you've learned, have
Yeah.
you tried to create anything new because you noticed there was a gap in this production
Um,
industry?
yeah, actually, yeah, there is. Okay. Uh,
Sorry.
no, it's not a short answer because it involves technology. So part of how living as composers is on what's called public performance royalties. And if this is getting into the wrong area, just stop me, okay? So what people probably don't know is when music is played on television, it has what's called a performance royalty attached to it. I don't know if you've heard of ASCAP or BMI, the performance
Sure.
royalties in the United States. Yeah. So as a composer, if you're going to write music, or as a publisher, if you're going to publish music, own the copyright, you need to register your work with either BMI, ASCAP, or SOCAN in New York, in the United States. If the music gets publicly performed, it's incumbent upon the broadcasters to report its public performance use to BMI, ASCAP, and SOCAN. And they get licensed to publicly perform these works by the performing rights organization. And they're obligated to report the use of the music on their network within their show content quarterly to the performing rights organizations. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So historically, though, it's basically been a pen and paper business and not that accurate. I got involved in trying to make it more accurate by introducing technology to the mix because I had access to technology and I like technology. And I thought that there would be a better way to do it with automation as opposed to relying on human interaction, which was inaccurate. So starting in the mid 90s, when most of these guys were probably not born, I started using technology to report the use of not just my music, but lots of composers' music that was being broadcast on television. And I built that business separate and apart from my career as a composer and a musician into a global technology company that is now in 14 countries with over 10,000 subscriber accounts around the world. So we monitor the internet and television in 14 countries for the use of our clients' music, whether it's Universal Music Publishing as an example, or my NFL and Fox theme. We monitor it electronically, and we help automate the reporting process for broadcasters as well as rights holders. And we also enforce the unauthorized use of copyrights worldwide for all the copyright holders. So it's kind of interesting. So yeah, I think it was a natural progression for me because I had the knowledge base of what the industry was doing and how it was doing it and where there was room for improvement and how I could inject myself into that process and try and improve on it. So I've devoted the last, I would say, 17 years of my life on top of my music career, on in the technology space. So, and I've helped, and I continue to, try and protect the rights holders who create the content to get paid fairly and rightfully for their music. And that's the good feeling part. We're out there trying to support their intellectual property.
That's so
That's
interesting
awesome.
that it happens so late in the game though too. Yeah.
It happened late in the game. Yeah, the name of the company, in case anybody's interested, I'm not trying to promote the business because that's not what I'm here to do, but it's called TuneSat, TUNESAT, and you can look it up online, tunesat.com. And you can see what it is and what we do. It's pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's called an audio fingerprint technology. Everybody knows what Shazam is. You hold your phone up, it tells you what the song is. We have a similar type algorithm that's completely different. That's called fingerprint technology. And we have our own fingerprint technology that does that, geared towards specifically monitoring the internet and television for copyrights. Pretty cool.
That is so interesting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
What?
Go ahead.
Do you have something, Kevin?
Nope,
Yeah.
you're good. Go ahead.
Okay.
I was about to
No,
read
I
something
was
else.
just. Oh, okay. I was just. Well, why don't you read it before because I was going to wrap it up.
Well, I was thinking, I'm seeing one or two pop up multiple times in terms of different hopes and wish you could have worked with or wish you could have written for. I think a good one to kind of start to tail ourselves out is someone or multiple people asked, where's the one? Nolan asked something similar to this. Nora asked something similar to this. Is there any kind of style or something that you haven't written for yet that you would really like to, whether it be like on a type of show, commercial, or just a medium that you want to write for that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Nolan, and whoever else asked that.
Nora.
You know, yeah, no, okay. You know, I spent a good part of my composing career writing music within 30 seconds or less, you know, for commercials. It was only when I started working for Fox, and maybe a year or so before that for other networks, that I started writing songs that were longer than 60 seconds, or compositions that were longer than 60 seconds, and producing those. At one point, I thought I wanted to work on feature films, you know. So I went out to LA and I thought about for a minute. I went to some of the rep companies out there that were representing, you know, composers. I thought about for a minute moving out to LA and doing long form movies because I thought it was a natural progression for me, but I decided against it. I didn't think it was right for me. I never did a full feature movie because it would take up 3 to 6 months of your life. And then at the end of the day, the director or producer could say they didn't like what you did and go somewhere else. And you worked on a movie for 6 months and it didn't go anywhere. And at that point, I was busy really being a working composer, and I had a steady clientele and steady flow of business. And I didn't want to leave the hard work it took me to get there to drop that to maybe get a shot at doing some feature film work. And being in New York is really hard to get feature film work. Well, it was when I was considering it. It's still hard because most of the films are produced, most of the studios are in California. So unless you're out on the West Coast, it's harder to be a feature film composer. Not as hard as much today, I don't think, because of the technology, and there are companies on the East Coast that do feature films. But for me, I made the conscious choice not to do feature films and to stay in New York and just do what I do, TV. And, you know, would I like to work on a film? Yeah, now I would, you know, maybe I'll get a chance to do it one day. But I'm not actively pursuing it right now. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Maris, do you see any other ones popping up there that you want to take a look at? Or
Man, there's so many here, but no, I think we've kept you long enough, and we really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Yep.
It was a lot of fun. It was some good questions you guys asked. So keep practicing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to have them. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. It's great that we're in arguably the most isolated time right now, and nonetheless reaching out, I think, wider than we have in a long time. So we appreciate you struggling with some of the technical stuff as we try and figure it out to get this going for the kids to.
Yeah, you know, I don't really have any words of wisdom other than, you know, believe in yourself. You know, you can do anything you put your mind to doing it. Listen to your teachers because they're there to help you, and ask a lot of questions because nobody's right. You know, it's just, you just got to make up your own mind, you know, but good luck to everybody. It's a great world out there, and you got a lot of equipment at your fingertips, and you could make some great music.
We didn't pay him to say, listen to your teachers. That was a happy No one
And
say that.
A lot of kids are saying thank you and thank you for being here. So
Sure, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I really dig that Christmas tree, man. That is awesome.
I like the Christmas
I'm
tree
not
more
sure.
than the
I'm
mannequin.
not sure I'm buying the story about the pillow and all, but I'm going to leave that for. I'm sure there's more.
I can confirm it's a mannequin, and it finds its way into my office more often than I would like. It's a little, it's scary. It looks like a possessed doll.
It looks like a hovering mannequin.
Well, it's from a department store dumpster, and it's actually a child mannequin, so it's small in stature.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's creepy.
That's even creepier, to be honest with you.
We have we started the last few years, we started a music and media class, and we talk a lot about different things. And one of the units we do is podcast production, and there's one that's great. It's called Lore, and he talks about kind of like urban myths and things like that. And we were talking about the Robert the Doll kind of possession thing, and lo and behold, one of the kids went to Steve's room and told him the story about the possessed Robert the Doll. So this was underneath my desk the one day when I went in. So that was a nice moment I
horrible.
didn't want to experience, but
Are we still here?
We are,
also,
but
we're gonna head. I think we are gonna head.
Okay.
all right. I'm taking us off the air.
I just want to give. I just want to give one plug if anybody's still listening here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just supplied some music for a very well-known entertainment attorney. His name is Richard Bush, and he was the one who won the blurred lines case for the Marvin Gaye estate a few years ago. Remember with Alan Thicke and Pharrell?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he's got a podcast called Blur Laws and Life or something like that. If you go to one of my websites, if you go to freeplaymusic.com, there's a banner ad at the top. You can click on it. You can also find Richard's podcast on Spotify and iTunes. He's done 3 or 4 so far. They're fascinating, all about Eminem and just crazy stuff that you would never hear about, as from an entertainment attorney in the music business. Really entertaining. I advise all your students to go listen. I get no money for it. We supplied music for his podcast, and he's just a really brilliant attorney, and his podcast is really great. It's very educational. It's a peek behind.
I want to go listen to it. Sounds
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah, we can put it out in the description of the. We can put a link in the description of the YouTube video.
I mean, he'll appreciate it. I gave him a plug, but that's not why I did it. I really think the podcasts, they're great. I actually might be on one in the future, but you guys got me first, so there you go.
It'll be a nice crossover for the kids.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for having me. It's really fun.
All right.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yep. Nice to meet you.
No, thank you very much.
Everybody too. Good luck, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.